Picture this: a crowded martial arts tournament, the air thick with tension, sweat, and the sound of fists meeting pads. In one corner stands Marcus Lightning Chen, a 22-year-old Taekwondo sensation who just claimed his third consecutive national championship. His kicks were poetry in motion, his confidence unshakable. He'd never met an opponent he couldn't humble. Across the room, quietly stretching in a simple white DM, was a man in his 40s. Graying beard, calm demeanor, nothing flashy about him. To Marcus, he looked like just another weekend warrior trying to relive his glory days. What Marcus didn't know, what nobody in that room fully grasped, was that he was looking at Chucknorris, six-time world karate champion, a living legend who'd forgotten more about martial arts than most people would ever learn. This is the story of what happens when arrogance meets mastery, when youth collides with wisdom, and when someone learns the hardest lesson of their life, that true strength doesn't need to announce itself. The Phoenix Open Martial Arts Tournament was supposed to be Marcus Chen's victory lap. He dominated every major Taekwondo competition for 3 straight years. His highlight reels viewed millions of times on social media. At 22, he was the sport's golden boy, sponsored by major brands, featured on magazine covers, and followed by thousands who hung on his every word about discipline, respect, and martial arts philosophy. But somewhere along the way, success had poisoned his spirit. Marcus had started believing his own hype. He'd begun seeing other martial artists not as fellow practitioners on a shared journey, but as obstacles to his inevitable greatness. His social media was filled with call-out posts, challenges to fake masters, and dismissive comments about traditional styles being outdated. Taekwondo is the evolution of combat, he'd posted just that morning. These old-school karate guys are living in the past. Time to show them what real martial arts looks like. His coach, Master Kim, had tried to warn him. Marcus, your technique is perfect, but your heart is growing dark. Remember why we started this journey. But Marcus wasn't listening anymore. He was too busy planning his next conquest. The tournament's open sparring session was in full swing when Marcus noticed him, a quiet man in his 40s, methodically working through kata forms in the corner. Everything about the stranger irritated Marcus. The simple, unbranded GI, the lack of flashy techniques, the way other martial artists nodded respectfully as they passed him by, as if he'd earned something Marcus couldn't see. "Who's the old-timer?" Marcus asked Jerry, a local fighter he'd defeated the year before. "That's Chuck," Jerry replied, not looking up from wrapping his hands. "He's been coming to these tournaments for years. Really nice guy. Keeps to himself mostly." Marcus studied the man more closely. Chuck's movements were fluid but unremarkable to his untrained eye. No spinning kicks, no acrobatic displays. Just basic blocks, punches, and stances that looked like they belonged in a museum. "Chuck who?" Marcus pressed. Jerry shrugged. "Just Chuck. He's from Texas, I think. Does some karate stuff." Marcus felt a familiar surge of competitive fire. Here was a perfect opportunity to make a statement. Show everyone what happened when outdated styles met modern excellence. His phone was already in his hand, ready to record what he was certain would be another viral moment of him schooling an overconfident has-been. "Hey, Chuck!" Marcus called out, his voice carrying across the training floor. "Want to do some light sparring?" Chucknorris looked up from his kata, his expression neutral but kind. "I appreciate the offer, son, but I'm just here to train and watch the competition." The dismissal stung Marcus's ego like a physical blow. Several fighters had stopped their own training to watch the exchange, and Marcus felt the familiar pressure of being in the spotlight. This was his stage, his moment to shine. "Come on, man," Marcus pressed, his voice taking on a mocking edge. "I promise I'll take it easy on you. I know traditional karate isn't really built for actual fighting anymore." A few nervous laughs rippled through the watching crowd. Chuck's expression remained unchanged, but something flickered behind his eyes. Not anger, but perhaps disappointment. "I really don't think that's necessary," Chuck said quietly, returning to his kata. But Marcus was already warming up, throwing a series of flashy kicks that drew appreciative murmurs from the younger fighters. His social media instincts were fully engaged now. This was perfect content. the young lion showing respect for the older generation while demonstrating how far the sport had evolved. Look, I get it, Marcus announced, speaking as much to the growing crowd as to Chuck. You probably dominated back in your day, but martial arts have evolved. We're faster, stronger, more technical now. This could be a great learning experience for both of us. Chuck stopped his kata and turned to face Marcus fully for the first time. There was something different in his posture now. Not aggressive, but focused in a way that made the hair on Marcus's arms stand up. Son, Chuck said, his Texas drawl carrying a weight that Marcus was too arrogant to recognize. I think you might be biting off more than you can chew. What Marcus didn't know, what he couldn't know, was the quiet giant he was challenging. Chuck Norris hadn't just practiced martial arts, he'd lived them. 6 world karate championships, founder of his own fighting system, a man who'd earned his black belt under some of the most legendary masters in history, who'd sparred with Bruce Lee, who'd fought professionally when tournaments were brutal, underground affairs where reputation meant everything and mercy was a luxury few could afford. But fame in Hollywood had changed Chuck's relationship with combat. He learned to carry his skills quietly, to de-escalate rather than dominate. The man who once devastated opponents with scientific precision now spent his energy teaching children, supporting charities, and avoiding exactly this kind of confrontation. He thought about walking away. Every instinct told him this young man needed to learn humility, but not like this, not in front of a crowd that would turn the lesson into entertainment. Chuck looked at Marcus, really looked at him, and saw something familiar. The arrogance, yes, but underneath it, the insecurity that drove young fighters to prove themselves against anyone and everyone. He'd been there once, hungry for validation, believing that defeating others somehow made you more than you were. The crowd was growing larger now, phones appearing, the energy shifting from casual training to spectacle. Marcus was already shadowboxing, throwing combinations that were undeniably impressive, his confidence radiating like heat. All right, Chuck said quietly, beginning to stretch his shoulders. But let's keep this friendly. The first exchange told Chuck everything he needed to know about his opponent. Marcus came in fast and hard, exactly as expected. A beautiful spinning heel kick that would have been devastating if it had connected. But Chuck simply wasn't there anymore, having slipped to the side with an economy of movement that made the dodge look effortless. Marcus reset quickly, his confidence unshaken. The old man was faster than expected, but that just meant he'd have to turn up the intensity. He launched into a combination he'd perfected over thousands of hours: jab, cross, spinning back kick, finishing with a jumping knee that had ended more than one tournament final. Each technique met empty air. Chuck moved like water, flowing around Marcus's attacks without apparent effort. No wasted motion, no flashy counters, just perfect positioning that made every strike miss by inches. The crowd began to murmur as the young champion, despite throwing increasingly desperate combinations, couldn't land a single clean shot. "Stand still and fight," Marcus snapped, frustration creeping into his voice. Chuck's response was a textbook reverse punch. Simple, direct, stopping just short of Marcus's solar plexus, with control that was somehow more intimidating than actual contact would have been. The message was clear. I could have ended this anytime I wanted. Marcus's confidence began to crack. His breathing was getting heavier, his techniques wilder, less controlled. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The old man should have been overwhelmed by now, reduced to desperate defensive measures while Marcus systematically picked him apart. Instead, Chuck looked like he was barely trying. Worse, he looked sorry for him. That's when Chuck decided the lesson needed to be more direct. What happened next lasted perhaps 3 seconds, but it would replay in Marcus's mind for years to come. Chuck stepped forward, not aggressively, but with the quiet certainty of a master craftsman picking up a familiar tool. His hand moved in a simple, circular motion that caught Marcus's next punch and redirected it harmlessly aside. Before Marcus could react, Chuck's other hand was positioned at his throat, not touching, but close enough that Marcus could feel the warmth of his palm. The tournament floor went silent. Marcus stood frozen, his entire body understanding what his mind was still struggling to process. He'd been caught, controlled, and positioned for a finishing technique by someone moving at what seemed like half speed. All his training, his championships, his social media fame, none of it had prepared him for this moment of pure, technical dominance. Chuck stepped back, his expression gentle but serious. "I think that's enough for today, son." The crowd began to whisper among themselves, phones still recording, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Someone in the back called out, "Holy, do you guys know who that is?" Marcus's world tilted as the pieces began falling into place. The respectful nods from other fighters, the quiet confidence. The way he'd moved like combat was something he'd been doing since before Marcus was born. "Chucknorris," Jerry whispered nearby, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. "That's Chucknorris." Marcus felt his knees go weak. The Chucknorris, the man whose name had become synonymous with invincibility, whose competition record was the stuff of martial arts legend. And he just challenged him to a fight while lecturing him about how modern fighters were superior to traditional ones. Chucknorris placed a gentle hand on Marcus's shoulder, and the young fighter was surprised to find it wasn't condescending, just kind, the way a grandfather might comfort a grandson who'd learned a difficult lesson. "You've got tremendous skill, Marcus," Chuck said quietly, using his name for the first time. "I've seen your tournament footage. Your technique is exceptional." Marcus looked up, confused. "But I couldn't even touch you." "Technique is just the beginning," Chuck replied. "The real martial art isn't about proving you're better than everyone else. It's about becoming better than who you were yesterday. The strongest people I've ever known were also the quietest. They had nothing left to prove." Marcus felt tears threatening to break through his carefully constructed confidence. "I thought I knew what strength looked like." "Strength," Chuck said, "is knowing you can do something and choosing not to. It's having the power to hurt and choosing to heal instead. You challenged me today not because you wanted to learn, but because you wanted to prove something. The question is, what are you trying to prove, and to whom?" The crowd began to disperse, the show over, but Marcus barely noticed. For the first time in years, he was really looking inward, past the trophies and the social media followers and the sponsorship deals, trying to remember why he'd fallen in love with martial arts in the first place. Chuck started to walk away, then paused. "Marcus, if you ever want to train together sometime, really train, not perform, you're welcome to visit my school in Texas. But come because you want to learn, not because you want to win." Marcus watched the legend disappear into the crowd, leaving him alone with a truth he'd spent years running from. The loudest people in the room are usually the ones with the most to prove, while those who've truly mastered their craft speak through their silence. And sometimes the most powerful lesson you can learn is that real strength doesn't need an audience, it just needs to exist.